Alrighty. Uh, Hello there, everyone. I wanted to make a follow-up video for the originally 1.5 hour-ish video and the introduction video that I added to the primer. I'm going to keep this hopefully much shorter, and this video is mostly just a situation update. What have I found since the first video? Where are we currently at with the deck? And just like a general philosophy thing of what to prioritize during flips, and I guess just like talking about the list overall. So I played my second tournament with this one. I went 1, 2, and 1. It was a 4-round Swiss event, a small event though, like 17 people, I think. And the finals pod, if I had dug one more trigger deeper, I would have found a continuer, and that chain would have won. I got to win through a force of will because of Cavern of Souls, which I saw with Charming Prince. Lots of good games overall. Very heavy turbo meta. Something that I was expecting, but I kind of chose not to take for it because I just wanted to test the like raw list as it is currently, because the way I like to build lists is to have them be the stock version, and then you can like adapt with it. And fortunately with Aang, finding slots, although it's really hard because of the probabilities and stuff, if you want to dilute the odds a little, like water them down a bit, not have as consistent chains, then you can just snip the worst continuers out and add like rule of law effects and stuff. Not that I would do it, at least currently, but yeah. The list has gotten a lot of views. That's nice. Likes also. I have had a lot of active discussioners on the Discord with this list, and I'm really happy about it. I was asked if this could be submitted manually to the decklist database, and it got added there, which is also cool that it's recognized as a good list. And if you haven't yet seen it in the primer, then there was also a tournament in Spain, which was the top 40 players, invitational kind of a thing, with also well-established players like the winner of the European Championship that was originally held, the first one of its kind that was held in Lisbon. And it was a semi, the player got to the semis with my list with like 2 card difference and like was threatening throughout the tournament. So in this sense, I think the list is pretty good. I hope to see more tournament entries with this list, or like slight variations with, you know, the core being the same. Mainly to see like how different pilots perform with it. I think mulliganing is still the most important thing with this list. Mid-chain, like decisions require risk evaluation, cognitive skills like memorization and figuring out what things you still have left, and how would you win this game. And then the other pointer, as we will get to this beautiful little swan that's head is actually covered up right there, there is a new gigantoplasm in the list. And I was really happy to think the card through again. Like originally I had taken all the exile effect creatures and kind of just like evaluated what do I want to play, which ones are playable. For example, most of the things that let you exile on attacking are too slow in my opinion. Although Felia and, you know, maybe Mist Meadow, which I think that's the name, no Vanisher, could be okay because there's some scenarios where you could activate them, like, or the Mist Meadow rather, during a chain. So I guess we hop into it. The deck has, I can't remember how it was during the first video, but since then I've found room for a lot more continuers. There's like Redemption Choir is the worst one currently, but if its condition is met, it functions as like a double duty thing where you get to bring a thing out, and if your chain fizzles right there, then next turn you can start a new chain without casting any spells, which is pretty much unique to this card, because the other things like the delayed flicker creatures, this is like a third delayed flicker in that sense that it persists. There's the big addition is probably that I want to talk about is the Salvation Swan. I'm sorry if this is a little blabbery, a little confusing. This is not a refined video. I just want to give an update on where the deck list is and those kind of stuff, like a pick my brain kind of a video. The reason why I included more continuers like Guardian of Girapur, whatever stag it is, Glimmerpoint stag, Flicker Wisp, was that the more I thought about it and the more I've played with the list, and like overall I think the best openers are Lionside Diamond hands, like pretty much always. Obviously you don't have protection aside from Cavern of Souls. Also something that I did was cut the 3 counter spells, or 2, 3 that I have been in and out, Pact of Negation, Force of Will, and Misdirection. The cut was based on the play patterns that I just value the highest, which are the turn 1 Aangs. And the most consistent turn 1 Aangs, or rather reliable hands where that happens, or where they happen, are the Lionside Diamond hands. Some Mana Bolt hands can do that, but they require extra mana. Turn 2 hands are much more common overall, which is kind of the slower ballpark, or like the bar for this list. Like if people say Etali you should find by turn 3 or maybe turn 2, I mean, like there are explosive mana engines, but the consistency, how often you get a turn 2 Etali compared to a turn 2 Aang, is, I think, wildly different. Enlightened Tutor, I think, wasn't in the previous iteration. I guess I just kind of didn't think about it enough. In the original version, which was much closer to the lists that are being brought to tournaments, like these mid-range, good card quality kind of things, which are kind of built the same way as most lists are. When you see a potential commander, too often people just go like, okay, let's just play the same 90-ish cards in with the couple extra spice cards that are good with the commander, and then your deck list is that. And we don't approach it from a functional angle where we would consider, what does this card actually do in this list? Like, is this card just good and then you think on the spot what the card does, or is there a solid basis on how the card functions in relation to the deck, in relation to other decks? Like Enlightened Tutor, it generally finds you mana or value. Like that's kind of the key pointers that it does. It can find a combo piece in some scenarios, but for example, for Aang, it's not a game plan fluid thing where you would think that these mana engines and card engines are just generally good. Like obviously your odds of winning get higher if you resolve a Rhystic Study, your odds get higher if you resolve a Smothering Tithe. If you get to turn 2 Sol Ring into a value engine, then you're pulling ahead pretty nicely. But those evaluations aren't done based on what the card, like overall, like how does it affect the pacing of the deck? Is the fact that you want, like, is the thing that you want to do with your deck to draw a lot of cards, or is there something that the deck list benefits more from? And for example, I played Kinnan for in cEDH Introduction to a Friend yesterday to have just like a solid common deck that's around. And Kinnan can run like 14 pieces of free interaction, which is unlike most other lists. Maybe some Bjorna Wernog thing can run like flares and stuff, but Kinnan just, there's a lot of things. And for Kinnan, obviously you can go for many kinds of hands. That's why the list is good, or rather the deck is, it produces a lot of mana, which is really good in cEDH. But getting a draw engine is so crucial for that deck. If the deck had access to an Enlightened Tutor, it would be like a lot better, even as good as it is currently. But functions wise, like the deck includes so much cards that go down in value and down in card count for you compared to your opponents, like Commandeer, which obviously kind of replaces its one card pitch, one of the pitched cards with the thing that you might get. But when you look at like openers, many openers just are really horrible because you have maybe access to mana, maybe access to some interaction. You really need to mulligan for those value engines, and then the deck just demolishes stuff because you have flash neighbors and stuff. And what I'm trying to conclude with this tangent is that this deck, for example, really does not function that way. If I wanted to mulligan for a value Ristic Study, winning with the card would be widely harder than, for example, with Kinnan. Less reliable mana development, there's not enough interaction to polish the table, and you know, these things I've talked about before, I think even in the first video, and I've written about it in the primer and talked on Discord. This is not a draw cards deck. This deck is a mulligan to an Aang deck. That is the surface level. Like if we would look at different skill levels of a player, it would perform this. Like there's a lot of these Gaussian curve memes. Gaussian curves are where the distribution of the amount of people, like for example IQ and stuff, like those perform this kind of a curve where like the lowest percentile and the highest percentile, the amounts of them, like the segments are much smaller in volume than like the middle parts. Many finals exams, for example, or systems mean that like the highest 10% grades or highest 10% scores get a certain grade, not dependent on the score they actually got. Like if you got 3 points in a 10-point exam and you were the only person to do that, you would get the highest score, or like the highest grade. But I'm blabbering a bit. So Enlightened Tutor was really crucial. The function for it is that it provides so many turn 2 Aangs due to Lion's Eye Diamond, also enables turn 1 Aangs. Like if you have the gemstone into Enlightened Tutor opener, those are like insane. So Enlightened Tutor should be considered as mostly a secondary Lion's Eye Diamond in the list. We did not get Jeweled Lotus, which I was hoping to get during the bans, which were kind of a letdown overall, but you can always wish. Now, other things. Shout out to Machiha, who was the person who played the this list in the Spanish Invitational. Just like highlighted Devoted Druid, asked what I think of it, and I was like, yeah, I really like it. Somehow I just hadn't considered it as a card that says bank 2 mana. Like when I looked through cards, I was too eager to look at things that provide 2 mana rather than maybe providing 1 mana twice. So Devoted Druid has been excellent. It gives you 2 mana, it banks. It's a green card, it's easy to play off of Chancellor and stuff. Another thing is also Gaia's Touch. It's just a mana bank, and I think I've talked a lot about the mana banks in the list because you want to mulligan to turn 2 Aangs generally. Turn 1 Aang is a luxury, but still not that uncommon. But these mana banks enable those starts. Even if you go down to like zero lands or whatever, having access to these is really good. Like if we could play squandered resources or stuff, those cards like that would be amazing as well. Now I guess something, I need to change this. This is something that I have been considering, but yeah, like maybe I can highlight the sideboard. And considering Hidden Strings is something that we talked about, which could ramp you, but it's reliant on having a mana positive thing like a soul land or stuff, and it's a little iffy. I ran through some tests and it wasn't that reliable. Mist Meadow Vanisher is mostly a pre-Aang doubler, but in some scenarios, if you have like a supportive parents out or something weird happens with a clone, you get to clone something that taps something, then you could like go nuts with this card, I guess. I've been thinking about Cabbage Merchant a bit more, mainly to bank mana, but it's so reliant on the seat position. If you go first with Cabbage Merchant, then you pretty surely can cast Aang next turn. If you're in the fourth seat, however, and people develop their mana rocks already, then it's a whole different dynamic, and it's also a 3-mana card, so it would be competing against the cards that say, for example, tap for 3 mana. Deseret is another mana bank kind of effect that's been talked about, where you could play this turn 1 and then find, for example, if you play it off of a mana vault, you could untap it, then next turn find Lion's Eye Diamond. You get the idea, but I have yet to test this card. Altar would be another payoff for infinite blinks, which we can assemble pretty easily just to mill your opponents, but I think the biggest risk with this card is that if your opponent has the option to wait until your chain would actually do something. There are certain chains that are really hard to interact with if they don't include any flicker creatures. So your opponent could be hedging on you not hitting that, or they just don't understand the deck, and then you could end up in a scenario where you start flickering two flicker creatures back and forth. Your opponent has a deadly relic or something, and then at some point during that, when they've milled 60 cards, including Sevin's Reclamation, and they would go like, I'm untapping next, maybe now is the time where I'll remove the creature. So that is something that I have kept in mind, but notably this card lines pretty well with Lion's Eye Diamond hands, where you can play this turn 1 and then turn 2 Aang and then threaten a mill win, I guess. Season of Growth, this was something that I considered when I counted the cream of the crop probabilities and stuff. It's just like a secondary, a bit worse. Cream of the crop sees 7 cards total. This sees 6 cards total with some dynamical differences between hitting a flicker creature, where Felidar Guardian is better with Season of Growth, whereas Cream of the Crop doesn't do anything with Felidar Guardian, but the other flicker creatures are better with Cream of the Crop because of their higher power, and Season of Growth worse. But still, the probabilities with this card were good. It trims down like the chance of you whiffing, and when we talk about wanting to have a either turn 1 or turn 2 Aang, or sometimes a turn 1 lucky doubler and then go for the Aang next turn. And then like an overall discussion or like theory that I've been thinking about is the like amount of these doubler engines like Relic of Legends, Food Chain. Those cards are astonishing when you get them down, but if we're looking like 1 year onwards from this moment, and we've gotten 1 clone printed in every set, will we end up in a scenario where I want to cut these like doublers that are not creatures and rather go for just full chain continuers? And that discussion is something to consider. Currently though, the probabilities of you winning off of a 1 chain are very promising, and I made 100 test hands where I basically mulliganed until I found a 7-card hand that cast an Aang turn 1 or turn 2. So basically a hand that I would keep, and the hand would still be a 7-card hand, which is actually bad for us. There were many hands like throughout where there's one kind of a win con card in the hand and it's stuck there because you can't put it onto the bottom of the deck. So generally, on average, you'd have to mulligan to probably like 5 or something to see an all right hand. If you get it on the first go, then fantastic. Then you've got a very good hand and you got nicely lucky. Or I guess it happens sometimes. But still, like the point being, on average, you should be mulliganing quite aggressively. And in those scenarios, you having, for example, Jackdaw in your hand, or Salvation Swan in your hand, Brennard in your hand, Soul Herder or Thassa in your hand, those kind of hands would benefit off of you from putting them onto the bottom because there's a lot of fetch lands. So you get to shuffle them back in, and then the deck is stacked in such a way that it's somewhere there instead of being on the bottom of the deck or in your hand. Notably, sometimes you might loop through your deck, but those require you to sustain the chain for long enough. Other cards, I'm thinking if there's anything. I guess we should go ahead and just talk about the Salvation Swan, because that's the biggest thing. This card really reads poorly when you look at it on a surface level. It says whenever this creature or another bird enters for you, then you exile a creature without flying, and then you return it to the battlefield with a flying counter on the next end step. So delayed blink on ETB, that sounds pretty good. And then there's like some words about another bird, but hey, who has another bird? But the thing is, Aang flies, and when you clone Aang, those clones fly. So then most people just disregard this card, and there was no discussion on it on the Aang Discord. No single list has played it. And when I went through all of the creatures that say exile a creature, return it, this was interesting to me. But then I just kind of felt it was too slow, even if I saw some potential it having like a way to generate extra chains. Now, you might ask, how does this work? So I guess I'll hop in here just for an example. We need, okay, Sakashima is fine. Then let's just get the clone and, for example, a Felidar Guardian. So for a moment, let's act like this is just like an arbitrary stack of our deck, and we play Aang, for example, turn 1 or whatever. Aang ETB, then we're like, oh yay, we found Sakashima. Then we have it be an Aang, then we hit the next thing and we're like, oh, we see an on-ground instant flicker. So this one or Icewind Stalwart. Notably, Renegade Rallier and Extraction Specialist, which I didn't talk about. This is basically just the Renegade Rallier, but it's overall just a little worse. But this was something that I had in mind as well earlier, but I just went with the higher card quality. But then I just ended up going for, like, you know, all the creatures because that makes more sense. Anyway, you flicker things, get a new clone, have it be a Felidar Guardian, another clone, Felidar Guardian, and finally, normally if we saw Gigantoplasm, we would be taking it, and then we would hope to hit Brennard and stuff. But what if I told you that this game state currently, which is surprisingly common, the order of these things can also change. You could have a Felidar Guardian into a Salvation Swan, then you flicker your Felidar Guardian, which flickers Aang, then you get the clone that enters as a Felidar Guardian, then Felidar Guardian can blink, and you could blink, for example, the Sakashima, or, well, I'll get to it soon, get another clone, and then initiate the sequence that I will showcase next. But let's act like this was the sequence. So you get Sakashima, Felidar Guardian into 2 clones, and those are Felidar Guardians. So these guys fly, these don't. You get Salvation Swan, and Salvation Swan says exile a creature that's on the ground and return it at the end step. What you want to do now is, while you could just do the glaring example of Felidar Guardian, it would just give you one trigger right there. But what you do is choose one of the Felidar Guardian clones. It is on the ground, you exile it, go to your end step, and it returns to the field. Apply the replacement effect and have it enter as a Salvation Swan. What happens now is you get its own ETB for it entering, and the other Salvation Swan sees it, which says when another bird enters, you trigger it. So now we need to flicker something that don't have flying. These have flying, and these have flying. So we will choose to exile these 2 things. And now onto the exciting part, which is we bring back one thing, we start a chain, then we find a doubler or whatever, or win outright, and then you get this back. Something what you can do also is, if you don't find a doubler here and you start feeling a little nervous, you continue with some clones. You could have one of the clones later on enter as a Felidar Guardian, which would blink a clone to get 3 Salvation Swan triggers, which would still be delayed, but you would get there. So Salvation Swan has increased the probabilities of the deck winning off of one chain by a lot. The original conversation with this card was like, when I just mentioned that I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not sure how good it is. Well, I started testing. I also started thinking more and more about it, and I did come to the conclusion that this card should be probably in every single Aang list. Same with Gigantoplasm. If you're playing a stacks build, please play Gigantoplasm, play Brennard, play Jackdaw. Even if you're just doing Aang for mostly value, then like you have still a solid amount of clones. You should be able to develop a board where you can benefit off of these things. And if you think about rule of law decks, if you can win without casting spells, isn't that exactly what you want to do? Stacks lists historically hinge on the ability of being able to win the game at a reasonable pace before your opponents find their like way out of the situation. Sometimes you clog the board up so much that it's practically impossible. But like, I hope if you're a stacks player of Aang and you look at this, please consider these things, because these have a really, really good performance, and I think those lists would benefit from these too. Another card for stack list, I think Sanctum Prelate should be played in stacks Aang lists. It just reads so well. You play it down, slow the game, play another clone, and your opponents can't play non-creature spells anymore. But that, I guess, is a discussion for another time. Now, the next thing, the 100 simulations. I talked about that I tested these hands. I will showcase one example that I like how I would go about this. So I would look at hands. For example, here I would consider, yeah, I want to mulligan. This hand, I want to mulligan. This hand, I want to keep. I want to play, actually, this way, play a City of Brass and a Delighted Halfling. In my upkeep, I want to go for Blindside Diamond, draw it, play it, Tundra, uncounterable Aang. When you play an LED effect and you activate it, you can choose to you choose the order what happens, how you pay the costs. Generally, always put the Diamond Lion or LED on the bottom and stack your grave so that if you find a Volrath's Shapeshifter, you have a way of like beneficially benefiting of it. If I just was dumb and now put the cream of the crop on top, I play Aang and I see Volrath's Shapeshifter, I would be screwed. But in this scenario, it would be either Restoration Angel or Phantasmal Image. But I will put the rest though first. ETB, I would look at 5 cards. I would say, okay, I have access to this, or I have access to this. I'd rather have a main phase continuer, because then Soul Herder and Thus are online. So these dice, I put those onto the bottom. I don't randomize them because usually the chains don't end up that far. And usually by that time you would have enough of a board or, conclusion to see if it won you the game or not. Prioritizing the legendary clone. We don't have a legend in the grave, I think, so we don't want to use this yet. But we could do Visage Bandit, and now since we see the loyal retainers, we don't necessarily have to sacrifice the original Sakashima, so we want to let this one die. Here, you could just do Volrath Shapeshifter, get it in the bin, later recur it with Redemption Choir if you want to, or you could go just for the wall. Generally, I would keep the Shapeshifter in the deck. Then, okay, we see two interesting pointers. Felidar Guardian is something that helps us get to the Swan wins. We haven't seen either yet. Gigantoplasm work with Brennard and Jackdaw, and overall just functions well, so I want to choose it, and I will now let it be a Sakashima, and Sakashima will die. This doesn't really matter. Just do the same thing. Delayed blink. During these tests, I prioritized Soul Herder and Thassa quite high, because if you're slamming a turn 1 Aang, discarding your hand, these are chain continuers that let you kind of go again for free next turn. It gives opponents time to maybe find something, but honestly, I think if during the mulligans the opponents don't yet have anything and you're giving them the 1 turn cycle, I think the odds are good enough, because vampiric tutors, this kind of stuff, they could already have happened, and then they can't change the situation or the plans. And, you know, creature removal isn't that common currently. We did have a 2-drop clone, so in this scenario, you could just do the Renegade Rallier to get the creature that sticks on the ground, or you could do Thassa, doesn't really matter. But let's do Thassa now. So, Aang here. Stalwart Flickering Aang. Copy Crook as an Icewind Stalwart. I'm thinking if I would want to actually blink it this way, like reset the Gigantoplasm to have Copy Crook be those, but as it is the Sakashima currently, it's a little. We find a delayed blink. So now we would go to the next player's end step, bring Aang back, continue the chain, and now we have where the chain would stop. In this scenario, if this already won, I would put into the segment or section of next turn win. So I evaluated 3 scenarios: outright win, win on the next turn, or whiff. While this chain, this single chain did whiff, we still have another go on the next turn because we found Thassa. So then we would go again from here, and we would fight Brennard. At this stage, we have I mean, we should have probably flickered this to be an Icewind Stalwart and then copy that. But anyway, we could then suicide that, get another Let It Legend rule die. We are currently banking 2 triggers, 3 trigger. Okay, Jackdaw, that works as well. And then we would win. So this would be put into the single, this would be a single chain win, because it was from the original 1 Aang cast. You didn't have to cast any spells. You just won off of that single Aang without a doubler out before you cast it. And now, drum roll, this is what finally happened, which was the round numbers. I did post some midway things in the Discord, but I wanted to have at least some kind of a data set for this. So 20, currently I will keep these numbers around. I will be doing more tests when I have the interest and time, and just seeing how this develops. But with this specific build, as of this date of the 18th of February, 20% of the chains win outright without having to pass the turn. 40% end up in you winning off of the 1 single Aang cast before, without any other effects being cast. And these either win during the turn cycle that you have passed. So for example, in the case of the Swan, I value the Swan very highly because it's a win condition. So if you see it during the chain, usually you want to take it, then either the next player's end step or the next player after that. So player 3 from your point of view would then, at their end step, you would win. Also with the Swan, because it exiles them until the end step, this gives us some nice things where we can kind of play around certain effects. If your opponent's board wipe, for example, you could still build kind of a board, or there's some interesting cases where stuff could happen. But this means that over half of the single Aang casts win the game. Without any other things, you just play a 5-mana creature and you win. And this also, notably, as I mentioned earlier, these are not mulligans to low numbers, which would be beneficial for us to have more good stuff in the deck for the chains. So I think, like, and also these don't account for any other spells cast. I want to highlight this. Many times, if you don't have a lead opener, even if you have a lead opener, if you were to find a Vizier of Many Faces, supportive parents, all of that stuff, which actually didn't come up in those scenarios, but sometimes you could see a supportive parents, then you would cast another spell, or you would have a clone in your hand for the next turn, stuff like this. You could still win and threaten the win on turn 2 very easily, but this example, this study has been to only consider the one cast without putting good creatures back into the deck during mulligans, and this is a very impressive number. And this is also, like, empirically feels like close to being correct, because I think it's the odds of winning or threatening a win are really high. And if someone were to, like, look at the list and, question things, there's no interaction, you can't play this, blah blah blah, I sleep, you could very much play interaction. You could cut down the 2-drop enablers. These numbers don't account for those, they don't need it. So you could technically, if you wanted to, replace all of those cards with free pieces of interaction. Obviously they're not good with Lion's Eye Diamond, but this is a possibility. And what I want to highlight within my list also is that I want people to kind of wake up and look at the list and try to make it better, give me ideas how to make it better, because as long as I'm working on this, I want to question my own theories, I want to question my own ideas, I want to see if I was wrong with some cards. For example, if I missed something like Devoted Druid, that was a clear include, it was exactly what I wanted. I think amongst the best effects for the deck are obviously like Lion's Eye Diamond, but we are never gonna get another Lion's Eye Diamond. Maybe. Well, we did get like Diamond Lion, but still. Tools that give us a turn 1 or turn 2 Aang. Those are what we want. And these effects are what those do. So anyway, like this, if this is for, I appreciate those who have faith in the list and stuff like that. But if I had the time, if I was interested, if I had started this project before the European champs in Munich, I think I would have had a very strong brewer's advantage. I think there was like one Aang list there, which was just like, a good stuff Aang list. People wouldn't have had any idea what the deck does. Think about this scenario where you see like a new commander, you read it and you're like, okay, yeah, it puts a creature into play. And then your opponent just like discards their whole hand with the Lion's Eye Diamond. I think in most scenarios, if you're not familiar, you would just go like, okay, this opponent is like throwing away the game, but whatever floats their boat. And if those scenarios, 60% of the time they would win, I consider that a pretty good piece of evidence, or like that. And also these don't account for the scenarios where you would end up with like 40 power on the table. There were multiple chains where it just didn't quite get there. The order of the creatures coming out was bad. We didn't find a certain effect, and it just kind of ended up in a scenario where no access to an extra trigger, but you have like 15 Anks on the board. And those boards could very much well win you the game already due to politics and damage. You could be like, yeah, I can knock 1.5 people out of the game. Why should I not attack you? Like, give me information if you want. If you were to be given an extra draw step and an untap, what could you do? Like, if you say that I don't want to tell about, like, I don't want to discuss it, then you just attack the player who's the most threatening to win. But if you are shown hand stuff and you get more information, then you could like navigate that situation in your favor, even if it ends like that. And also, like, something to mention, I've uh, I have these on the considering list, which is the stack species. If you wanted to play, like, I think deafening silence is the best single effect. Oh yeah, it's here. But like if you're fearing turbo decks and stuff, then like deafening silence. Some other cards that are good, like if you're fearing removal, you could circumvent the lead discarding your hand problem by including like Voice of Victory. Grand Abolisher is a little hard to cast, but you know, Paladin class effects like these. Uh, so there's room to work with the list, even though the deck slots are like super tight because you need a certain amount of lands to have consistency to be able to find those lands. Currently, I think it's 1.77 lands in an opener or something like that. Let's see. Here, 1.77. Okay, I somehow remembered it. But like currently you're seeing almost 2 lands per opener, and this does not include the other 3 mana sources, because I don't think you need any more than 2 lands. What else? Go Goldfish the deck. The deck list is pretty spicy. Learn the ins and outs of how to like navigate those chains, because you are given information with every trigger. You get to see stuff, and you just need to keep kind of be mindful of what are the chains, what are the most probable chains that you can piece together. Now, if these things fluctuate and go like a little hard, then the optimal things are probably impossible to figure out on the spot, because you are given information, you need to make a decision in a respectable amount of time, and then you would have to carry on. And sometimes if you end up seeing the wrong, it's like you see an effect which would lean towards getting a jackdaw, or you would see a certain card that would lean into another direction, then you might have the outcome be different even if the choice was good, and this would cause like a perception error where you would get like confirmation bias on, or rather like the opposite of it, where you would be like, I chose different, like I chose the wrong option because I didn't win. But this is something that you should never do. You should also never look at the top card when you mulligan. While it could give you, if you were emotionless and your memory functioned like a computer memory that doesn't uh, alter itself, it doesn't become like distorted even very quickly, then it's really, really impossible to be like making correct judgments on, yeah, like I'm, I should probably be able to hit the land, or maybe I don't. Like, oh, rewarded for keeping this hand. But the decision to keep should never hinge on those things. You should always be considering the opener as it is. And something that I also did, uh, like when I evaluate certain cards, like how good is Mana Severance, for example. This card reads horribly, but mathematically it's really good. Uh, will I be playing it for forever? I don't know. Maybe not, because the card itself is a really clunky card. But, you know, math is math. But like when you evaluate cards, what I did is that I don't play them out normally. I don't draw the cards. I don't uh, look at the random draw and be like, ooh, oh, I found a Chromox. Now this hand actually became good, and I could actually win off of this. Or the similar principle with this like simulation where I tested how many single chains win, or rather like single hand casts win. I didn't play those nutty hands where you actually had like a doubler plus Aang for turn 2. Or maybe you know had a clone in hand and then you can just play it on your turn. But I wanted to just see how the single trigger would work, and this would functionally mean that I wanted to test if you're playing in an environment where maybe an opponent does have a force of will, but they're not kind of threatened enough by the Aang, and they decide like, I'm not going to lose to this. I will get an extra untap, especially if they discarded their hand to Alliance a diamond. I just wanted to see how often those chains win without giving an opponent another window to cast a Force of Will, for example. So yeah, I've blabbered quite a lot, but hopefully this is fruitful for you. I don't intend this video to be like super digestible to everybody. More so just for those who are interested in this project and have a good like base understanding of how this list works, because this list works very differently to other cEDH decks where you just don't look at hands and go like, these are cool cards, I'll see where they take me. You have to embrace this deck in a way where you should be like, where does Aang take me? And you don't know that, but you just need to be bold with your mulligans. In the tournament, I mulliganed to 2. I didn't see LED, Enlightened Tutor, Mana Vault a single time throughout those. I think I saw one like slow turn 3 Aang with no other stuff, and I was in the 4th seat with 3 turbo decks at the table. So, I need to be able to threaten speed. I need to be able to cast Aang by latest turn 2, or I have no dice in the game. And well, I kept the land at the Gaia's Touch. I drew a land, played that, and I got to try an Aang cast, I think, on turn 3 or 4, because Rogsai was just policing the table with the Necropotence, and they didn't have to extend at any point, and they had like 2 counters for Aang, which is presumable, but still. A lot of talking, a lot of weird tangents and stuff, but the decklist is pretty much intact for the most part as it was. I don't think this whole core of things will even change really, because I think that it's been trimmed so hard. I think the best trims to do like are the kind of conditional containers like Redemption Choir, or the delayed flicker creatures because of the anti-synergy with Thassa and Soulher, and giving extra time. But I think the biggest change that I could see at some point in the future is trimming the 2-drop enablers that you would want to cast before Aang, and instead look to have the maximum amount of continuers, which currently don't exist. Like only those attacking copies are left. This has every single on ETB thing aside from Deceptive Frostkite, which would only work with Gigantoplasm plus 4 mana, so you have 4 toughness, 4 power creature out, or Thassa, I guess, but that doesn't even flicker it, so it's basically just Spark Double. It is a 2-drop clone that can enter as a 4 power creature. What else? The deck is so layered. This deck is so cool. It threatens wins really in a really neat way. You don't need to feed Rystix Mystics, so I think from this point onwards, I think we will be seeing in this vein of like the way I've evolved the list, these lists being played at tournaments, and I'm sure that they will be working pretty well. I think most of their score lines will be either a win or a loss, because you don't have that many means of going for a draw. Although you can still play like the deploy clone kind of a game, but usually your hands that you keep should already be aggressive hands, because you would be basically only gated by Force of Will. Now, how would this deck fluctuate for the worst? How would the time make this deck worse? If there was more spot removal being added, if there would be more, I don't know, free counter spells, subtlety being played. Kinnan can play subtlety, but most lists, like other than that, don't do that. But like these effects that would let your opponent counter the turn 1 Aang by either removing it or doing something. And then just like a meta shift I guess the turbo meta is the worst for this, and also good for this because less of a chance your opponents interact with you, and because you probably can convert to a win faster than most turbo decks because you have a currently 60% chance to win when you play Aang. And that doesn't even account for all the scenarios, so it might be even higher than that, but just going lead Elvish Spirit Guide Aang, if it technically wins you 60% of the games that you just do that, and you navigate your chain correctly, that number is huge. Now, the reason why I'm making this video, I guess I didn't base it is, well, I talked about I wanted to highlight the situation of the list. I have some important tournaments coming up. For me, it would be better not to share this kind of information or be like, yeah, this deck is really, really, really good and you should respect it. But I think the communal aspect and the way I kind of see this is I'm more interested in playing this deck in multi-hundred people tournaments rather than those tournaments where I have my locals who already respect whatever I do on whatever deck, and the rogue aspect is much lower, even though I did have it in the previous tournament. Just sadly, it didn't convert in the semifinals, or rather the finals, sorry. I guess that's pretty much my thoughts for this moment. Summoner's Pact is another card that's interesting to try out. If we can see that 60% of the Aangcasts win, then maybe going balls to the walls and just getting an Elvish Spirit Guide could be the play. But I don't know. We will see. Go check the primer, go read it. I'll hopefully I'll at least link this video in there or embed it. Probably make like a video section where there's updates that I make every once in a while. But I'm working on the primer constantly, and yeah, hop on the Discord and come talk about the list, comment on Moxfield, comment on this video, I guess, if you have something that you want to ask, some thoughts about the list and stuff like that. But maybe I guess the last thing I want to say is that always remember and always kind of consider that this is the stock lists. You can change some pieces if you want. Just evaluate what the pieces function as. Like, what should you cut? I know cutting is really hard when someone else has made the deck and or mostly like evolved the deck. But still, like, just give it a go. You can cut for testing purposes. You can cut a continuer. It's not the end of the world. For example, if you cut a Redemption Choir and you want to see how a certain stacks plays for you, if Shala is important for you to have protection, or Sylvan Safekeeper, you know, these kind of effects. Maybe Voice of Victory if you face a lot of counter spells and you want to win on your turn, and you know, maybe this is like the last thought I want to put, that get excited about ideas, test them out, report how they felt, and just hop on the stuck on repeat train and enjoy sending an early Aang and just winning games. Oh, maybe one more thought. Prioritization, like in terms of what would the ideal hit off of Aang be, has changed a bit. The conditions currently, one thing that I value highly is the delayed blinks. If I don't see any, like if I see just a normal chain continuer or I see a Soul Herder or Thassa, I will usually take the Thassa and or Soul Herder, even though they shut off, for example, the other one out of those, or you give time to your opponents potentially to react. But evaluate these based on the like game state and what decks are at the table. If you know that you can't let your opponent untap a single time, then maybe going for the direct chain is correct. But on ground flicker creatures are really important now with the Salvation Swan. So if you see Felidar Guardian or even Restoration Angel because of the Jackdaw option with Gigantoplasm, the flicker creatures that stay on the board that don't fly should be valued quite highly. Aside from that, legendary clones are still like important because you need to have a Gigantoplasm that sticks around. Sometimes you need to sacrifice Aang and hope to find something that lets you get another persistent Aang. For example, a legendary clone, but then you see flicker creatures, and then life sucks at that point. But still, like, most of it is the same, but value the on-ground flicker creatures more highly now. I'll hopefully be able to add and edit the general priority list a bit. But still, now there's 2 creatures that care about the 2-drop clones, so remember those. Usually you don't have to face a situation where you have the 5 best cards and you need to think, okay, what is the best option here? But still, play to your outs, alter it based on what you've seen, and have a good time. I guess this was my bit of yapping while being tired and hungry. Now I'm gonna go eat, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys next time.